I'm Laura Bonnell, and this is the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast coming to you from Detroit. Please subscribe and even rate and comment on our podcasts when it moves you. I learn something new with every podcast, and I'm always inspired by the people that are showcased here. We don't give medical advice. You need to connect with your doctor for that. I hope that this Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast educates you and sparks some volunteering or advocacy. The CF community needs people like you. Thanks to our sponsor, Viatris, for their support. Approximately 10% of the CF population is waiting for a CF modulator drug that will help them by correcting the underlying condition of their disease. Current modulator drugs help more common CF mutations. Emily Kramer Golinkoff is one of the people who doesn't have a CF modulator that will help her. Her foundation, Emily's Entourage, is a leader in research. They are focusing on people with CF who have the nonsense mutation. That is 10% of the CF population that is still waiting for a CF modulator. On Emily's team is Dr. Chandra Ghose, who is the Chief Scientific Officer. Dr. Ghose founded Bioharmony Therapeutics, an early-stage biotech startup that specialized in the development of novel antimicrobials to combat drug-resistant bacterial infections. Chandra spent 8 years at the Aaron Diamond AIDS Research Center, where she focused her research on developing life-saving vaccines in the laboratory of Dr. David Ho. Dr. Ghose earned her PhD from New York University School of Medicine in microbiology and her bachelor's degree from St. Louis University in biology and theology, splitting her time between the United States and campuses in Spain. So really excited to introduce you to her. She's so bright and holds so much hope for our future. So let's get started. Welcome, Dr. Chandra Ghose. It's wonderful to have you. You know, I'm friends with Emily Kramer Golinkoff and love her, of course. How could you not? And I'm so glad that we're talking about all the wonderful things that Emily's Entourage is doing. And the thing that I wanted to start with is that I read on your website that the nonsense mutations are rare in CF. And I knew that, but I did not realize that there are also the cause of 12% of the genetic diseases. I'm reading it because I want to make sure that I get it correct. So that impacts 30 million people worldwide. So the research that you're doing could not only impact cystic fibrosis, but also other rare diseases. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So the catch-all term I use for nonsense mutation and the work that we're doing is that CF could be a pathfinder. So it's possible that we find a way to correct these nonsense mutations that would translate to a therapy for the final 10% of people with CF. But it's possible that other diseases that are impacted by nonsense mutations, they could learn. You know, the scientists who are working on those diseases could learn about what we are doing, the technology we're using, whether it's base editing, prime editing, that's getting into the nitty-gritty of the science. And those advances in technology can be, again, translated for all of these other diseases. So that's what's really exciting. And it's vice versa. There are people working on many other diseases that we could also learn from. So that's the beauty of, the collaborative approach that we take.
And why don't we back up just a little and explain what nonsense mutations are for anyone that doesn't know?
Sure. So, in our genetic code, it's like a wonderful system. You have DNA, and from the DNA, you get RNA, and then the RNA gets translated to protein. So a nonsense mutation is basically a mutation that prevents the whole gene from being translated. So you only get portions of the whole protein. So for CF, you have the CFTR protein that's needed for the normal functioning of cells. But if you have a stop codon, so basically think of it like something that stops the whole protein. So you only have part of a protein or no protein sometimes. So when you have those kind of mutations, you don't get the full protein that's needed to do the proper function, whatever that function may be. And this is across the board. And this is, can be present in many, many different proteins and DNA, etc. So a nonsense mutation is basically something that prevents the whole gene from being transcribed and translated to make the correct protein. And
it is rare or more rare, is that correct?
So the nonsense mutations are rare. The 90% of people with CF, they make the protein, but they are not pulled to the surface, or, they don't function properly, but they actually have that protein. So the protein is being made, they just don't show up at the right location.
And it's so important to not forget the 10% of the population that can't be on a CF modulator. And thank goodness that you and Emily and her family and all the researchers are working on this, because I think it's the biggest hope for the CF community is what you're doing. And that must be so exciting and fulfilling for you to be on this team with this group of incredibly dedicated and smart people.
I mean, I joined Emily's Entourage because I love the mission. It's such a mission-driven organization. And since I've joined this, I've also realized that the whole community, it's not just the organization, it's, people with CF, their families, and it keeps getting bigger. It's like the whole scientific community, even though folks who are on modulators and benefit from it, they also are single-mindedly focused on bringing the whole 100% of people with CF to where they are, to have, an amazing therapy that can allow people to enjoy their life. So the whole CF community is quite amazing. And that includes pretty much all the folks that I mentioned.
And I think too, as a mom who has two girls with cystic fibrosis, it's very difficult to talk to another parent whose child cannot be on a CF modulator. You feel horrible. And to know that Emily Kramer Golinkoff, because one of my daughter's names is Emily, but to know that she can't be on it too, it's like, come on, we got to get this done so everybody can have a benefit. You've done a lot before you came into the CF world, but what is it like for you? I mean, you just touched on some of it, but what is it like for you to come into this cystic fibrosis community and work for Emily's Entourage?
So I used to be in the anti-infective, infectious disease, antimicrobial vaccines world. That's what, from the beginning of my, scientific career as a PhD student to postdoc, academia, and even starting my own company. What I really enjoy about the CF community is, like I mentioned, it's actually quite cohesive, whether you're talking to the scientists in the lab or companies that have just spun out from, universities or independently, as well as if you go to larger biotech companies like Vertex's of the world, or even large pharma like Boehringer. It's a small community, even though, there are a lot of players in this space. And everybody sort of agrees, and maybe this is something that's unique in the rare disease world, that the mission is what's driving everything. So that is something that I find really interesting in the rare disease space, from the community perspective. And also because I'm a scientist, I also love all the really cutting edge science that's happening in the CF world. The Vertex modulators are amazing. If you really think about in 20 years, there was nothing, and then, it's in patients approved. And so I'm really looking forward to what the next breakthroughs are in this space, and how they can also benefit those or even beyond the CF world. So like you mentioned, I mentioned the pathfinder diseases and things like that. So that would be I'm really excited to see where Vertex's mRNA trial goes for DMT, all the companies that are kind of in clinical trials but are about to go into clinical trials. So that's all very, very exciting and really cutting edge science. So that to me is always exciting.
Can you tell us what you're working on now, how the research has evolved and then to where you are today?
Yeah, so I think, the past 10 years or so, there was a lot of focus on modulators, right? I mean, for obvious reasons. And once the modulators, they didn't just, start off with a bang, the Trikafta happened, it was in stages. There was like, the first generation, the second generation, and then finally Trikafta, that really for the ones who benefit, like was actually a home run in a way. I mean, obviously keeping in mind, there are several, there's a lot of people who can't take that for side effects or whatever reason. But in general, that's, the modulators did work. And so I think for the next groundbreaking studies, we are going to see some sort of gene-based therapy. So whether it's mRNA, gene therapy, like mRNA is already in clinical trials, but the gene therapies are, they're going to get there in the next 5 years or so. So that'll be really exciting to see. And I think that's where, at least that's what I believe, that's where we're going to find the solution for the final 10%. And it's not just for the final 10%. It might just, some of these therapies are for the whole gene. So, it's for the 100% of the patient population. Obviously, these are not easy trials, but, delivery to the lung is extremely difficult. But, we saw how well the mRNA vaccines worked for COVID. So, using some of the same players in the field with Moderna and Vertex and things like that, I think we can get there to make the next generation of these type of therapies that, will improve.
When you're all in the lab and you're talking, do you see it coming through in the next decade, or is it longer than that, or is it there's something going on?
So, like the mRNA trials already happening, so it's not the next decade; it's in the next couple of years. Like we're going to get some hints about what to do, what not to do. Is that going to be the final therapy? I don't know that answer yet, but like with the modulators, the first one was 4% of FEV1, the next one went up to whatever number it was. So I think it'll be like an iterative process. That's how science works. So, but I think within the next 10 years, I'm at least hopeful, there will be a therapy for the ones who don't benefit from the modulators right now.
Yeah, I think that is what I keep trying to tell everyone, is that all the work that's being done on other drugs or drugs in the cystic fibrosis community, it all helps. I mean, I think what cystic fibrosis did definitely helped the COVID vaccines. Like the knowledge helps everything. And then it helps sickle cell. And you're never just doing it for one disease. It's always going to benefit another disease as well.
Yeah, so that's the most amazing thing about science. I think it's like nothing is being done in silos, right? Like, so, lipid nanoparticles that were that were used to deliver the COVID vaccines are now being used to deliver the CFTR mRNA. So it's, nothing is ever done in a vacuum, and the collaborations is what, drives science forward. So we have to keep that in mind always. And I think, we will have some answers pretty soon, I hope. And if not, we keep at it, and that's the message. 10 years is a very long time. And, there is a huge sense of urgency. Can we cut that down to 5 to 2? Absolutely. And we just have to keep on pushing. And I think the people who are, have the final 10% as their priority, as the other priority right now, know that, every year is a long time. So 10 years is a very, very long time. So if we can cut that down, working with the scientists, with biotech, with pharma, with the FDA together, if we can get to that, time is so important. And that's the mission. It's critical to have really fast breakthroughs. And even if you don't have the answer, even if it doesn't work, to know that quickly is also very important in the scientific world.
And can you tell us how many different research studies you're working on, or, where the hope continues to be? So
I don't work in the lab anymore. So Emily's Entourage doesn't work in labs. We give out academic grants and private grants to to either labs, companies, and so on. So, if anyone who has seen our, kind of the grant, the awards in the last year or so has, they've seen that we're kind of looking at the gene therapy, the gene-based therapy world as where the next, answer is going to be. So we have several grantees who are doing amazing work with starting from tRNAs to, base editing. And it's, we're a global, organization. We fund labs in Europe, obviously in the US, And, recently we've also seen, these kind of transatlantic collaborations happening. So that's very exciting. And gene-based therapies is kind of where we focused our attention on. We had a symposium in December that was focused on gene-based therapies, and kind of going back to your point, nothing happens in silos or in a vacuum. So we opened up and that was the intention, to have a conference where we have CF people, non-CF people kind of come together and, talk about their research and see if there's cross-pollination of ideas happening. We had Drew Weissman, won the Nobel Prize for 2023 for his COVID vaccine. He talked about his work on CF and lipid nanoparticle delivery to the lungs. And we had folks from the UK talk about pig disease. We had a professor, Dr. Musunuru from UPenn, talking about the company that he founded that is using gene therapy to fix heart disease. That's such a huge mortality, morbidity rate globally. So the hope is we're going to learn something, bring some more people into the CF world. We want as many people working on CF as we can. And that was the whole idea of the symposium. And it was a very successful symposium. And we're looking forward to our next one in 2025 that will be on gene delivery. Because that, I think, is like the holy grail of CF research. How do you deliver gene-based therapy successfully to the lung, whether it's systemically or, locally, and reach the cells that need to be, changed so that people with CF can benefit.
And it is very exciting. And when I was looking at those research grants on your website, can you tell us where those grants are going, and then how, if people have another idea, they can apply to Emily's Entourage to get a research grant, possibly?
Of course. So we have requests for proposals at least once or twice a year. It varies year to year what time those are announced, but we have them usually every year. So we give out two types of grants. One is the more, our bread and butter grant, which we call translational grants, where you have an idea, you have some cell models or animal models, that you have some proof of concept that this technology would work. And then you apply to us, and these are around $200,000 for 2 years. And it's enough funding to do one or two key experiments that could, make or break, the study. And so those are what you see on our website, and those are given out to labs that are doing gene therapy, that are also, developing phage therapy for people with CF with, really hard to treat multi-drug resistant infections. We have modulators also that, small molecules that we funded. And then we just trialed this type of grant in September, where we're looking for, it's called collaborative grant. So it's basically bringing a couple of PIs or scientists together who have more than just a proof of concept. So these are a little bit more advanced ideas, where we are hoping to connect 2 or 3 different scientists with very unique know-how and bringing them together to address this issue. So someone may have the gene therapy concept or the mRNA, someone may have the animal model, and then someone may have the delivery technology. And we are hoping that these folks get together and apply for a grant, so it makes, the study move a little bit more seamless. And by seamless, I mean, there's a time component that we're taking out of the equation. So we are funding them in the idea that these studies will progress a little bit quicker. And, obviously, we don't bat at 100%, like that's science for you, but we are hoping, even if it's negative, that we get those answers quickly, because that's equally important. And so we have, a couple of finalists, and we're probably going to make the announcements in the next couple of weeks or in the next month.
And that is so exciting. I think for any of us in the CF community, whether you're a scientist or a parent, just to hear about what is being thought about or tested, and what a great space that Emily's Entourage has provided. If you didn't exist, we wouldn't be where we are. It's so needed. And this is money that some of these scientists wouldn't have access to otherwise. It's just game-changing for the CF community.
It really is. And what's unique about Emily's Entourage is our focus on the final 10%, like solely on the final 10%. Obviously, if it benefits everyone, that's even better. But the idea is, like, every single grant we fund, we want to make sure that the final 10% is, front and center when we fund these grants.
Can you talk about the working on the rare W1282X, which is the nonsense mutations, and explain, I believe that's Emily's mutation,
right,
and that's the whole reason for this, but if you can explain that work.
We're not solely focused on W1282X. That's how Emily's Entourage came about, because Emily has that mutation. And it's not even the most rarest or not the most common out of the nonsense mutation. But we have, if you look on our website, we are funding several other nonsense mutations. So I want to make sure that, people understand that. Obviously, we would love for a therapy to happen for W1282X, but any of those nonsense mutations, any research that's successful for one of the nonsense mutations, basically different sites where these mutations are. Anything that works, we hope, for 1282X could be extrapolated for any of the other mutations. We're also hoping, because now we're talking about, ultra rare, like we have the rare population, now we're slicing and dicing into the ultra rare population. We're also hoping that, as we go through this process, there might be a way to expedite clinical trials for all the nonsense mutations, because it's hard to do these trials, right? And we're going down to such small numbers. We're hoping we can come up with some innovative way, like if something works for 1282X, could that work or be approved for a different mutation, even though the trials were not done at that? And we see that with the modulators. You do paratyping, and if you see that, the modulators work in the cell type, at least in a petri dish for one mutation that, it's not a delta F508 mutation, but it shows efficacy in a petri dish, then the patients become eligible for modulators. So we are hoping that we slowly can expand, use umbrella clinical trials or what have you, different mechanisms, work with the regulators and the companies to make sure that this space moves fast. And if you haven't caught on, like I keep on saying fast, and that's really important, because the more time we take, there are people waiting and, they're getting sicker every day. So we don't want that.
Because it's so important. I even think about people that I met, 29 years ago when Molly was diagnosed with CF, and then Emily was diagnosed a couple of years later. But I think of those people that I met, some of who didn't ever get to try a CF modulator, and it could have saved their lives. I mean, it's like, wow, so yes, speed is really important because we want to help as many people as possible, right?
Yes, absolutely. And, and CF is a progressive disease. So the faster we can get the drugs, even those who are in the final 10%, who haven't benefited and have, lung disease or advanced lung disease, at least the progression will stop, right? So.
Right. And that's the thing. I was just talking with somebody who has CF, and that's what she was saying. She was saying it was a bummer that it didn't fix anything that's already happened in her life. It only starts right where your disease is when you take that CF modulator. Right. It can't fix everything that's already happened. So that's, again, the reason for the urgency, so that you don't get sicker, the disease doesn't progress and all of that.
Yeah. And the other thing to think about, and I find this so interesting, is how clinical trials are done in the US. So in general, children are relatively stable, when, between 0 and 18, when they have CF. But clinical trials are first tried out in adults. But by then you have some lung disease. So if there's a way, and obviously, the modulators were tried in adults, and then they kind of worked their way down to children. And now it's approved. I don't know what the latest age is, like 1 year or 2 years or 18 months, something like that. But there is an argument to be made, like, can we flip that narrative? Like, I know there's a safety concern, and I know the FDA has a huge role to play in this. Why do we not also start doing, let's say, a gene-based therapy trial in children who have healthy lungs, so they don't progress to when they become eligible, at least even for the trials? But, I understand the pros and the cons, but, it's something to think about.
Yeah. And I mean, how long does that take to change? Because as a parent of just remembering where I was mentally when my girls were diagnosed and I needed an answer, and I needed this modulator that came out for my girls in 2019. Like all those years of anxiety, I think as a parent of a younger child, if I was given the option, I would have said, absolutely, put them in clinical trials. Like, let's go, so I hope it changes.
I hope so too. And also like gene therapy is new, right? So there is, I'm sure, going to be a little bit of hesitation, but, as things progress in the next decade or so, I think those things will change.
Yeah, I hope so. Do you feel like we're getting back to loving scientists again? I mean, I never stopped, but I'm just talking during the crazy COVID prior administration insanity. There was a lot of misinformation, misunderstanding, and I just hope that people are getting back to understanding the importance of science and appreciating it.
And I think that, of course, I hope it goes back to that, because without science, even with COVID, we'd be in a pretty bad shape.
Right.
But, and I think about this quite often, like scientists are not always the best communicators, like the CDC doesn't have a PR team, right? It's just not what we do. Like, leave us alone. We work at the lab and we publish something. But
right.
To communicate science so that the layperson can understand and trust, that's really important. And I think that's, I think maybe the CDC learned something, like, in terms of communications and having a public-oriented outlook. I mean, there's so many things that we could do better next time. So it goes both ways. Like, having the public's trust is very, very important. And I think without trusting science, we'd have to go back to where we were, like, even 100 years back, or, when there were no antibiotics or no vaccines, life expectancy was so low. And now it's there because
right.
those things.
Absolutely. I agree. So the final 10% survey that Emily's Entourage did, can you talk about that? And can people still take the survey?
So the survey's closed and we published it. So if anyone's interested, it's on our website. It's really interesting. And it's obviously surveying people who are in the final 10% or their family members. This is kind of their voice, like what they're feeling, what their health is like, what they hope for, like what's the pain points, right? Like on an everyday basis, what would they like seeing change? The hours that they spend doing their therapies, they would love for that to go away. A modulator that would help them breathe better, something to manage exacerbations. That would be really important. So these insights are not just important, like, just to know how they're feeling, but it also informs, biotech and pharma as they're developing new therapies. Like if there was a drug that you had to spend 4 hours taking, nebulizing, then pharma and folks could be like, okay, this would be really hard for everyone to do all the time. So can we cut that down to 2 hours or, so it's really interesting and important to have these surveys to inform people in the scientific world so that when they're developing drugs, they have front and center on their mind the needs of the CF population, from the parents, the caregivers, the family members, and the people with CF. So the survey was really important. We've done it twice now, once right after COVID in 2022, I believe, and then in 2023, and we just published it. Not much changed. We wanted to see if there was a yearly change, but the trends kind of remain the same. There's a huge interest in people with CF doing clinical trials. So that's always interesting to know. We have a patient registry that is direct to patients and they can sign up for it or family members. And that's really important because companies need to know where these patients are so they can bring the trials to them. And the patients need to know about these trials, so we help share that information with people on this registry as well. So we're trying to basically connect the dots from the lab directly to the people with CF. So funding research, moving it to the next step, starting companies like Spirovant, helping with clinical trial recruitment, understanding patient need, and then also working with the FDA to make sure that, the trials do move quicker, and also helping the companies by, telling them where the patients are and informing the patients of these trials. So we're trying to make sure like every bit and piece of drug development is being made slightly easier and faster by EE for the 5-10%. So each of those pegs along the way are equally important.
Thank goodness for Emily's Entourage, because in addition to all the research and the research grants and the registry and the survey and everything that you're doing, this keeps the final 10% in the minds of everyone.
Right.
Every person, scientist, doctor, patient, parent that I talk to when we talk about the CF modulators always says, but we can't forget the final 10%. And I think that's in a huge part to Emily's Entourage, making sure that it is on the front of everyone's minds that, hey, we're not done yet. We're not even, we're not, I was going to say we're not close. We're doing great, but it's still important to get that for the final 10%. And then even the current CF modulators need to get better, right? They need to improve, and so that there's fewer side effects and things like that. So we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. Would you agree?
Absolutely. We are not done till it's 100%. And that is not going to happen till that whatever drug gets approved. So unless that happens, like even funding a lab or finishing a clinical trial, that means nothing unless it makes it to the patients. So there's a lot of work along the way, but we're getting there, and we're, finding where the pain points are and hoping we can address those. So that's where I think Emily's Entourage plays a huge role, to be, nimble, to be fast, and to kind of fill in the blanks as we go along, and finding out where, those blanks are not being covered by anybody else. And that's kind of where we fit in and, bridge that.
The link to Emily's Entourage is in our show notes, but what else maybe that we haven't talked about do you think is important for people to know, or how they can help? Or should we be reaching out to more scientists? Like, what is it if people say, what can I do for the final 10%? What would your advice be?
So we are always looking, from the scientist perspective, look at our website, see what we fund, apply for funding. We're always looking for interesting, studies to fund. If you have something interesting, even if you're off cycle, email me. I'm chandra@emilysentourage.org to discuss your science. I'm constantly talking to scientists. That's what I do every single day. And if it's something we also fund things on the fly. If you have a really interesting idea and you need $20,000 to do that key experiment that doesn't quite fall under our grant mechanism, we have funded those in the past because we can be nimble. And, so that's obviously from the scientific perspective. If you're a sponsor or a company that's thinking about clinical trials, reach out to us and see how we can help with, patient recruitment, to get the patient voice in your decision-making process, whatever that may be, because it's important. And, so that's for the companies. And for people with CF, their family members, please, please, please look at our patient registry and sign up. If we can get trials to you, and if you can come to the trials, and I don't mean physically, but find out more about the trials, I think that's also incredibly important, because that's where that final piece is before the drug approval. And that's because this patient population is so rare, we want as many people within that final 10% to sign up for a registry. And it's on our website. You can sign up for it. We're going to roll out a new platform for the patient registry soon. And if you're a family member with, a child under the age of 18, you can sign up. And even if you're, if you have an adult child or family member, you can still sign up and encourage them to sign up for the patient registry, because that's what I think. All the things we do at Emily's Entourage, I think the next big thing is going to be that patient registry, where we pair up this ultra-rare patient population with the sponsors.
And I know that you talk about this as well at Emily's Entourage, but I just wanted to say again, people of color, it's really important, because they're often forgotten about in this whole process. So it's really important if they get involved.
And we have to do better in terms of reaching them as well. So, and, CF was always historically known as a Caucasian disease, and it's not. It's just we were never looking. and it's really, really important that we make huge strides in reaching that community. It falls on both our side. It's on us as well to make that stride and to make that reach and to reach out to that patient population as well.
Well, I'm so grateful that you're in this CF world, and thanks for everything that you do for Emily's Entourage and the CF community. And my gosh, your antimicrobial research is so needed as well, like phage therapy. All of that is so important, not only to the CF community. That's a whole nother topic, but it's really interesting and exciting and promising, and that will impact the world.
Yes. And
everybody.
With the rise in multi-drug resistant infections, it's a silent pandemic. It's not like a viral pandemic that just happens and shuts down the world, but it's equally, I think it's probably more dangerous because it kind of creeps up on you. Like, even with the COVID pandemic, 30% of the people who got COVID died from a bacterial infection. So that's something to think about. That number is huge.
It is. Well, I hope that very soon, in a year, let's be really optimistic that there is something for the final 10%. And then I'm sure we'll all have the biggest party the CF community has ever seen. So, yes. And your email is in show notes if scientists want to reach out to you.
Or anyone.
Or anybody. So, thank you. Anything that we didn't mention that you wanted to say about Emily's Entourage?
I mean, just, follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter. There's always such interesting blog posts and things like that of what we are doing. If you're interested in finding out more, that's probably the best way to find out, on a regular basis, where we are, what we are doing, what, fundraising is happening, where we're giving different talks and information sessions and so on. So there's so much we're doing. We have information sessions for people with CF. If they want to learn more about, gene-based therapies, we did one last year. We might do one this year. And, just in general, connect with us in whatever medium is convenient for you and, find out more about us. That's what we would like.
Great information. I love looking at everything that you're doing. And thanks again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The original music in this podcast is performed by Kevin Allen.
It's not complicated.
Who happens to have cystic fibrosis.
We all got our worries and fears. I know it's got you frustrated. But loving you is so alright.
This has been the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. For more information and to learn more about the Bonnell Foundation, visit our website at thebonnellfoundation.org. That's the BONNELL Foundation.org.
This podcast was produced by Jag and Detroit Podcasts. Follow our show on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening right now.